Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Illegal by K.J. Gillenwater, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. 24 hours after Selena Hernandez had self-deported, she wondered if she'd made a gargantuan mistake. Mexico City sucked. The heat, the smells, the crowds, the garbage, and the language. Selena had thought it would be easier. Somewhere deep inside her mind, the words were buried, the long-lost Spanish she'd been born speaking, but everything she dredged up was useless. Words she didn't need, words she couldn't cobble together into a coherent sentence. Why couldn't the cab driver, who stared at her blankly, read the address she'd written on the motel stationery and take her where she needed to go? The taxi, an old Volkswagen Bug, sat at the curb, its engine idling. Selena repositioned on the uncomfortable back seat, which had a large rip where the stuffing poked through. The driver reeked of cigarettes and body odor. Even with the window rolled all the way down, she couldn't escape the smell. The street outside her cheap motel room hadn't been any cleaner. "I need to go here. A key!" Selena leaned forward and pointed at her paper. "The U.S. Embassy." Her driver, a man in his 30s with dark skin and an appearance her mother would have called Indio, glanced at her. "En donde?" On the edges of her mind, Selena knew what that meant, but for the life of her she couldn't remember. The last thing she wanted to look was to look stupid in front of a complete stranger. She briefly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Please, I want to go to the embassy." If Selena still had her smartphone, she could have figured it out. She'd only been able to afford a flip phone, which she'd purchased at the airport. Her driver swiped to a translation app on his phone. He spoke loudly. "Adonde?" Then held it up so Selena could hear. "To where?" An electronic voice said it in a stilted manner. "The embassy. The United States Embassy." A sudden lightness filled her. Before the app could translate, her driver's eyes brightened. "Oh, el empresario de los Estados Unidos." "Yes," Selena said, her mind at ease. "Los Estados Unidos." Her accent was all wrong. Despite the fact her dark eyes, black hair, and browner complexion echoed the appearance of others here, Selena had never been to Mexico. Silently, she vowed once she was able to leave, she never would come back. All she needed was an immigration visa, and she could return to Tucson and the life that waited for her there. With the destination decided, her cabbie pulled away from the curb and into the maze of traffic. At 2 in the afternoon, the number of cars jammed on the road was a sight to behold. Multiple lanes packed with taxis, cars, buses of all sizes. Exhaust billowed from tailpipes that would have been forbidden in her home state of Arizona. Selena scanned the mountains in the horizon and noted the brown haze that settled over the valley. Out of the kingdom of the Aztecs, a massive modern city had been built which teemed with millions of people. Selena hoped her time spent here would be short, barely memorable, a blip in her past to be forgotten. The taxi zipped around slower vehicles. No signaling, no rearview mirror checking, just move, 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 zip, zip, zip. They approached a huge roundabout with multiple lanes and a towering statue standing in the middle. She'd read about it in the in-flight magazine on the plane. El Ángel de la Independencia, a golden angel alight a tall, skinny tower. The driver navigated out of the roundabout, zoomed past the Sheraton Hotel, and made a right. "Casiahi," he pointed ahead. Selena nodded as if she understood. Butterflies filled her stomach. This stop had huge implications for her. She wanted to do everything right, follow all the rules, obtain a visa, and then go back home, like the immigration attorney and the authorities had told her she could. The driver pulled up to the corner down the street from the embassy building. Close enough. Her appointment had been scheduled for 2:30, in 15 minutes. She had to walk a half block and then locate the right office inside. Selena handed the driver some American dollars, which he happily accepted, and climbed out of the hot, grimy taxi. Everything had to go smoothly here. Her future depended on it. She clutched her handbag close to her body and made sure it was zipped close. She'd heard about the crime stats in Mexico. Not good. Especially for someone who appeared to be a foreigner. Her black hair and olive skin might make her blend in momentarily with the locals, but the minute she opened her mouth, it was obvious she was American. Or was she American? What exactly made someone an American anyway? A look? An experience? A certain length of time living in the U.S.? These questions had been ping-ponging around in her mind for a couple of weeks, and she had no answers. The cab pulled away. Selena squared her shoulders, took a breath, and tripped over her own 2 feet. She tumbled to the cracked sidewalk and hit her knee hard on the concrete. Instant embarrassment in front of a stream of pedestrians. Her emotions already on edge, she worked hard to keep in the tears that threatened to spill. "Señorita?" Selena flinched. The sun blinded her. "Permite?" A hand grabbed her elbow and lifted her up. The act happened so quickly she hadn't had time to consider whether or not she wanted any help from a stranger. "Gracias." She shielded her eyes from the bright sun. A tall man stood above her. Dirty blonde hair, blue eyes. He didn't appear to be Mexican, but she'd been fooled before. Plenty of more European-looking people rounded out the citizenry in El DF, or Distrito Federal, the common name for Mexico City. His grip had been strong, dependable, nice. He beamed at her. His gaze roved over her figure, mutual appreciation of a sort. Her thoughts grew muddled. "Gracias," she repeated, and flashed a fake smile. She repositioned the strap of her purse, which had slipped, nodded, and went on her way. The attractive man blended into the crowd. His strong grip on her elbow had steadied more than her body. It reduced her level of anxiety several notches and boosted her confidence before she faced the most difficult situation of her life. A human touch made her feel normal again. She'd been so isolated and alone since her mother's arrest. She strode forward to the embassy entrance. The building sat like a behemoth on the busy street. The ugly gray structure with a strange overhang and green awnings didn't fit in with the glass front of Sheridan Hotel on one side and a more modern office building to the other. A flicker of doubt glimmered. She couldn't do this. She couldn't go in. A mini panic attack struck. Her feet wanted to move forward, but she grew dizzy and short of breath. "This is stupid, Selena. Go inside." She needed a moment to gather her thoughts, get herself together. She wanted to go into the building confident in what she was doing. Glancing at her watch, she saw she had a few minutes. No need to rush. Time to calm down and slow her breathing. Chill, chill, chill. After dabbing at her knee using a tissue from her purse, she swept her hands down her skirt to straighten any wrinkles, fluffed out her hair, and retucked her blouse. The panicky thoughts faded. Her emotions finally in check, she took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Wyatt couldn't keep his gaze off the attractive Mexican woman he'd helped on the street. After 6 months at his new post, she'd been the first interesting thing to cross his path. In her red skirt and white blouse, she'd been hard to miss, and her practical flats had caught his eye. Most Mexican women higher on the economic scale in the capital city dressed to the nines, fashion forward. The stunner's shoes didn't match her outfit. He'd expected at least 4-inch stilettos. When he'd helped her up, her short stature made the lack of heels even more intriguing. The brunette headed in the opposite direction of his destination, the Starbucks on the next block. The office coffee tasted horrible. Too long on the burner, not enough grounds, and probably cheap to begin with. He shuddered at the idea of having to continue his day with mud in his mug. He'd taken his mid-afternoon break, set an appointment for exactly 10 minutes on his phone, and sprinted down the street to pick up a venti mocha for himself and a hazelnut latte for Antonia. The headache he'd had since waking up pounded in his skull. Only several shots of espresso mixed with hot steamed milk and chocolate syrup could cure it. His head throbbed in anticipation of its fix. The U.S. Embassy occupied one of the busiest sections of downtown Mexico City, only 2 blocks away from El Ángel de la Independencia. Wyatt couldn't see the monument through the trees and manicured shrubs that lined Avenida Paseo de la Reforma, but he knew it was there, standing tall in the center of the massive multi-lane roundabout studded with traffic. New to the city, Wyatt had learned to use the monument as his touchstone as he made his way throughout his myriad of streets. As long as he knew where El Ángel was, he never felt lost. Wyatt paused at the crossing, waited for the light to turn, and then made his way to the next block. At least Starbucks reminded him of home. Sure, he could find American fast food restaurants all over the city if he craved something familiar, but for some reason a venti mocha worked every time. Wyatt entered the Starbucks. He queued up in line behind a well-dressed Mexican woman and a poorly dressed American tourist. He wished his Spanish were better, so no one lumped him in with the latter. "Venti mocha y grande avellana latte, por favor." The tiny worker behind the counter bent her dark head as she punched the correct key. "Your name?" His attempt to blend in with the Mexican population had failed. She'd pegged him as American even with his better-than-average Spanish accent. "Wyatt." The woman scribbled his name on 2 cups and then set them on the short line by the espresso machine. She moved on to the next customer. Antonia better repay him for the favor one of these days. A Prosecco magazine had been left on a table. The garish picture on the front of the news journal under the headline "Narcotrafico Guerra" caught his eye. Several limp bodies with ropes around their necks hanged from a highway overpass, one of them a middle-aged woman. He flipped through the pages to the story. Even with his limited Spanish comprehension, he could get the gist of it. Drug crime on the border had hit new highs. He closed the magazine and rubbed his hand over his shirt. Hard to believe the pictures depicted the same Mexico. He glanced at the garish tourist and the well-dressed Mexican woman waiting for their orders, both of whom oblivious to the dangers that lay 1,500 miles to the north. Wyatt checked his watch. He'd have to hurry. His supervisor grew irritated when he didn't stick to the schedule. Exactly 10 minutes. No more. "Wyatt!" A second employee wrecked one of the cups and set the freshly made drinks at the pickup counter. He gingerly took both hot paper cups. "Wyatt," he said under his breath. Not the easiest name to pronounce for a native Spanish speaker. No W sound existed in Spanish, so the closest sound was a diphthong of 2 vowels with a bit of a G mixed in. He'd grown used to it. Wyatt hurried to the door, stretched his gait, and carefully carried the 2 steaming beverages. He wanted to take a sip of his drink, but feared he'd spill all over his blue Oxford shirt and striped tie. From a distance, he caught sight of a red pencil skirt and the figure in it entering the embassy building. He picked up his steps, hoping for another encounter with the beautiful woman in the practical shoes. Selena unfolded a piece of paper. The embassy lobby confused her. Signs pointed in different directions. She needed to find visas and passports. Maybe she should have done more research to better prepare. As a more intuitive person, she preferred acting on the fly. Taking time to think things through slowed everything down and resulted in talk but no action. A pet peeve of hers. "Necesitas ayuda?" a deep voice asked. Selena jumped. The attractive man who'd helped her up outside stood next to her. She'd blocked everything out and had been lost in her own thoughts and worries. "Lo siento." He held 2 Starbucks cups and had a concerned look on his face. Now she felt the fool. She hadn't made it clear on the curb she didn't speak Spanish. If she wanted him to go on his way, she'd either have to be very rude or ignore him and fess up to her fakery. "Are you stalking me?" She stepped back and tightly clutched her purse. The man's eyes widened. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought earlier you were... So you made an assumption about me based on my appearance. Bad idea, dude." She let out a snort. "Maybe think next time? I speak English. I'm an American." The nerves in her stomach twisted into sourness. Her reaction drew the attention of the people milling around them. The man backed away. "I was just trying to help." Selena gave her best queenly look and marched down the hallway. She had no idea if she needed to go in that direction, but anything for a great exit. Wyatt had really messed up. He'd seen an opportunity to meet a hot girl, thinking he'd missed his chance out on the sidewalk. He truly did not know how to talk to women. Another checkbox in the column of clueless and incapable, which he'd been accused of in the past. Attractive women usually made him feel that way. Maybe he should quit trying. Perhaps his mother had been right. He wanted to shrug it off, but the feeling covered him like a cloud. His phone beeped to remind him his 10 minutes was up. He wished he had time for an hour in the gym to burn off the bad vibes. Instead, he'd have to deal with an afternoon of customer service. Not exactly the dream career he thought he would have when he'd taken the job with the embassy. World travel, foreign people, amazing sights, new foods and experiences. But even working the easy cases at his desk while he learned the finer points of immigration law and passport rules gave him the opportunity to find out more about the State Department and perhaps apply for the Diplomatic Security Service. He followed the departure of the woman. Her confident walk revealed to him she had been out of his league. He took a careful sip of his mocha. The flood of caffeine into his veins soothed his damaged ego a bit, and the headache he'd had all day eased some. He let out a sigh and glanced at the big clock in the lobby. A few more hours of work and he could head home. Maybe take a run around the neighborhood, find a new place to pick up some tacos or a torta roll. Wyatt headed for the employee entrance down the west hall. A buzz of activity greeted him. His supervisor, Max Peltrain, nodded as he walked in. Antonia smiled at her drink delivery. He let out a breath, returned to his window, and took down the closed sign. After several gulps of his mocha, he set it to the side. "Next!"